What's up, everyone? Welcome back to Protect and Serve. It's our third edition already, Michael, I think.
Third edition. It seems
Third.
like it's our 30th edition, but I'm just going off of this administration and the amount of well, I mean they don't disappoint when it comes to topics. But I was actually thinking before the show, Maya, like we could have a whole discussion about law enforcement, policing, police reform in America, the criminal justice system prior to Trump 2.0, but now it's like it's a completely different conversation
Mhm.
vis-a-vis Trump 2.0 because again I think that the buzzword for this administration is unprecedented. We seem to use that now on an hourly basis. But I have seen so many things transpire just in the past week that to me are unprecedented and that I have never seen before in American law enforcement. And I spent 2 decades as a DC cop.
Well, and the thing about unprecedented, it's become cliche, but the point is that most people do not know how to deal with unprecedented events. We don't know how to manage them. And that is across the board, the people who are on the receiving end of what is happening, but also the people who are trying to stop it. Everybody's standing around going, holy shit, this has never happened before. The courts are scrambling to try to stop it. And even when the courts make rulings, the Trump administration often ignores those rulings. And so we were talking before the show about the excessive use of force that is on full display in Chicago, in Portland. And so you introduced me to something that I want to introduce everyone else to as well, which is the use of force model. But before we do, I want to play that clip from a priest in Chicago. Now, when I saw that, I was like, is that the same priest or a different priest? Because DHS, ICE seems to be targeting priests who are just participating in peaceful protest. When you saw that, what were your thoughts?
I mean, again, just another example of outrageous and unlawful behavior um, by ICE agents or DHS or Customs and Border Patrol, whatever agency it is. We don't really know because they all wear the same military fatigues, and there's no agency identifiers, and rarely do we see a badge or a name tag. Just a bunch of guys in camouflage with masks on.
So
Um, Go
It,
ahead.
it seems like they're trying to keep people from exercising their right to protest, because what I see there are very few people. I don't see a situation where anyone is in danger. I don't see anyone impeding the work of the DHS officers. And so, what exactly would prompt someone from a high angle like that
No, I agree.
to?
I mean, I would describe that, from what you can see in the video, it's clearly a peaceful protest. I'm sure maybe there were some individuals in the crowd that were, trying to antagonize or taunt the ICE agents. But that being said, that's not a justification for using less than lethal force, which is what pepper balls are. Again, the training behind that is it's a crowd dispersal tool. Typically, within the Metropolitan Police Department, this was something that had to be authorized by a lieutenant or above. It was only authorized in very specific situations, and it's not meant to be. Um, it You're supposed to utilize it against specific targets. It's not like just deploying CS gas where that's something that's meant to disperse a large group of people. This is more of a specific or targeted situation where you're targeting individuals whose behavior has risen to the level that would justify that level of force. And clearly, in this situation where you don't see any ICE agents or any officers, law enforcement officers outside of the fenced-in perimeter, you see, I think, 3 individuals on a rooftop shooting down into the crowd. And the other thing that is, goes against all law enforcement teaching and policy and practice is shooting people in the head.
Hmm.
That is never, ever, ever taught, trained for, with one exception, and that's deadly force. And that is when an individual may be wearing body armor. But clearly, this was not a situation of requiring deadly force, and they were using a less than lethal. It seemed to me like it was antagonistic.
Hmm.
I see so much of this behavior as designed to elicit a violent response from these protesters. And I can't explain it any other way. It seems as though, and I guess it goes in line with the way that this administration works, is that they are trying to incite a violent interaction so that they can justify deploying
Hmm.
National Guard troops or active duty military, like we've seen now in Washington, D.C. We've seen it now in, Chicago, and soon to come in Portland, Oregon.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because it does seem like they're trying to incite, to instigate, and it feels almost as if back in Los Angeles, and I was in Los Angeles during the protests that got incredibly out of hand. And it seems like they weren't prepared then. They didn't have all their ducks in a row to, he keeps talking about the Insurrection Act. And so they're trying to trigger that same level of chaos and violence that they saw in Los Angeles. And instead, they're being met with people who are dancing in frog costumes. In Portland, they're being met with, the priest. And so I think we have a clip from I think it's Christy Noam when she's on the roof with Benny Johnson looking out at the war zone of Portland. If we have that, we can pull that up. But in the meantime, I want to talk about this excessive use of force and this use of force model, because I think most people aren't familiar with this. I know I wasn't. Now, is this something, can you just walk us through this?
Yeah. So essentially, I want to say it was probably in the late '90s, early 2000s when this was developed. I remember it being taught in 2001 when I was at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia, and it was taught again to me when I was going through the Metropolitan Police Department's Academy in Washington, D.C. So what you have is originally it was the use of force continuum. It was a triangle, but it's essentially the same thing here, the use of force model. And it begins with on the left-hand side of the screen, each of those levels depicts the behavior or conduct being displayed by the individual that the law enforcement officer is interacting with. It goes from compliant to resistive, which is in the passive. Then you have actively resistant, and then you have assaultive, and then assaultive with the threat of bodily harm, serious bodily harm, or death. And then the corresponding on the right-hand side is the level of force that coincides with that conduct that the officer is authorized to use to, neutralize that conduct or that threat.
So, of the priest's behavior, where would it fall on this use of force model? Is it comply that he's protesting? So, but he's just standing there. So, is
First
that
of all,
compliant?
protesting, as was in that instance there, protesting obviously is a protected right, free speech in this country.
For
Um,
now?
well, for now, yes. And so, absent any other information or facts, what that priest was doing was even below compliant. The priest was simply exercising his free speech. He had a right to be there, and he has a right to do exactly what he was doing. He posed no threat to any law enforcement officers. I mean, like we said earlier, it didn't appear that there were any cops outside of the fenced in perimeter. And so, you know, uh, in my mind, there's no force. Now, if there was a situation, and I mean, I'm just thinking like best case scenario for the officers, um, in order to deploy pepper balls, CS gas, what have you. Um, the typical scenario would be a supervisor would come out and whether over the loud horn or just verbally would say, this is an unlawful assembly,
Mhm.
and give warnings. Now, at the Metropolitan Police Department, we had to issue 3 warnings, and usually they would wait 2 or 3 minutes in between each warning, and they would let them know this is your first warning. This is an unlawful assembly. We're giving you a command to disperse. And then they would do the second warning and then the third warning. And then they would let them know that you are going to be placed under arrest or we are going to, you know, utilize whatever to disperse this crowd. I've never seen chemical agents deployed unless the crowd was actively resisting the law enforcement officers. I mean, listen, there's a protest every single day in Washington, D.C. Most of them are completely peaceful, but there are times in which individuals who engage in forms of protest and civil disobedience, the purpose is to get arrested. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to become actively resistant or assaultive, but they might just sit there. And the officers have a responsibility to clear that area, whether they're blocking, a driveway or a passageway, what have you. And then the officers have to go in and effect an arrest. That doesn't require pepper spray. It doesn't require shooting pepper balls at people's heads. That would be reserved for a situation in which officers go in, they're trying to effect an arrest, and people become actively resistant or even assaultive towards the officers. And
Well,
so, again, there's no justification for this.
Well, yeah, and in a lot of these situations, particularly in downtown Los Angeles, there was a lot of confusion because there were a lot of people there for the protest. And so, this idea that the average person who is protesting, and yes, I'm sure there were the people who were wanting to get arrested, but a lot of the people down there were just families. I was down there with my daughter. She's a photographer. She was taking photos. I was doing what I do. And it struck me as really frightening when they started rolling in mass. And I knew something was up, and I didn't know what was up, but I knew something was up. And it was a practice that they use called kettling. And kettling was not something that I was familiar with. I was on a call, I think, with the Los Angeles mayor. She hadn't been aware of the term, and I think now in New York they're not even allowed to do it. I'd love for people in the chat to talk about kettling if they are familiar with it. But Michael, can you talk about what kettling looks like in one of these
I mean,
situations?
essentially, it's using officers to contain protesters. And I mean, I'll give you probably the most infamous example of that, at least in my knowledge, because it resulted in a number of federal court rulings. Was the Pershing Park protest or Pershing Park arrests in Washington D.C. And I want to say that this was during the Occupy movement, like Occupy DC, Occupy Wall Street movement. But there were a number of protesters in Pershing Park in Washington, D.C., and the police officers used this technique, kettling, or I don't know, whatever people want to call it. But essentially, it was, they lined up officers on all 4 sides of where these protesters were, and the protesters were many of them in the crowd were being assaulted. I mean, they were hurling, bricks and things like that at officers, and so they moved in, they surrounded this group, and they ended up making all of these arrests. Well, in addition to arresting the few handfuls of individuals that were, you know, breaking the law, they also arrested people that were just having lunch in the park. They arrested innocent bystanders. And so, as a result of that, there were multiple $1 million lawsuits that the city had to settle. And we had to create a policy that allowed for, and continues to this day, to allow for an avenue of escape all the way up until the time of arrest. And so once a scenario has been, or once an assembly or a group of individuals have been declared unlawful, and the officers move in to make an arrest, essentially all the way up until the moment of arrest, those individuals have to be afforded the ability to leave of their own recognizance. I mean,
And
obviously,
as we
go ahead.
I was gonna say, and as we know, that's not what's happening in with this current administration. People are not given the opportunity to disperse. With the kettling that was happening, if you weren't paying attention and weren't minding your, what is it, your tens and your sixes and all of your things, you could effectively end up being trapped. And it's very frightening. And I think it's fracturing trust. Like, for any relationship, we require trust. And I feel the communities, there's a whole lot of evidence now for why people are like, fuck the police, fuck ICE, because what is happening is unprecedented. As you mentioned, we have the I think we have the Christine Nome photo or video, if we can pull that up now. So it sounds so quiet. Are war zones this quiet?
I,
And
you know, just
there's no
we
smoke.
were saying, we were saying earlier, right? I think I was talking to Sam earlier.
Oh, there it is. There's the
Yeah,
craziness. The
right.
chicken
The
costume.
chicken costume and what looks like probably a dozen people, but he looks like he's taking a nap. It's
Protesting is exhausting.
again, it's like that movie Idiocracy. Like this whole thing is being run by some of the stupidest people that America has ever produced. But because they're using armed law enforcement officers who have a tremendous amount of power in this country,
Mhm.
it is so dangerous. Um, and I think what is, you were talking earlier about trust and how people are, that this fuck the police, fuck ICE sentiment is coming back. In my mind, more so than it ever was, during my career as a police officer, and which included the Black Lives Matter, 2015, all the way up until present day. This is just something totally different, and a lot of it just has to do with the fact that this one agency, or these two agencies, Customs and Border Patrol and ICE, are acting in this manner, and their agency is unaccountable to the American people. There's zero transparency with the American people. Um, and all of these other agencies are being co-opted into participating in these events. I mean, I look at Washington, D.C., where, our standing policy my entire career was, we do not participate in immigration enforcement operations. And we've talked about that in other episodes. And the reason behind that is that, as a police officer in Washington, D.C., and as an agency in the Metropolitan Police Department, our responsibility is to police all and provide police services to all the residents of the District of Columbia, and that regardless of your immigration status. And the only way for those individuals to trust us, to feel comfortable reporting crimes to us, to feel comfortable being a witness to a crime, um, for us, is that they won't fear being questioned about their immigration status or their relatives' immigration status, while they're interacting with law enforcement. And then Trump comes in, and you see this whole dog and pony show in Washington, D.C., and there is absolutely no pushback on behalf of these agencies. And listen, I understand that legally there was not a whole lot that Pamela Smith, the chief of police, or Muriel Bowser, the mayor, could do.
Mhm.
But they could have been a whole lot more articulate engaging with the public as to why this is a bad idea. Why is it that we have this or have had this policy for so long? And they said nothing. And I think that, we're getting to a point now where silence is complacency.
Hmm.
And um, and if these law enforcement agencies want to come out on the right side of history, I'm not telling anybody to break the law, but you've got to be vocal and you've got to tell the people where you stand. Because if you don't, you're what everybody is thinking is that you're in agreement with the way that this agency is conducting itself.
No, and I'm glad you said that because there was, I believe it's the head of the National Guard in Portland, in Oregon, who said that he's going to obviously follow, and the language he used, he said lawful, I believe, and so I think he's very aware of his oath, and he said in a hearing that he would, if he were to deploy the National Guard there, it would be to protect the protesters, and I think that is a sign of perhaps hopefully a sign of hope that there are people who are starting to recognize that their oath is important, because otherwise they're radicalizing suburban moms right now. I had a friend, Lauren Carter, on our show yesterday, and she's just like a suburban mom, and now she goes to protests with goggles and stuff to neutralize tear gas. This woman was a wedding planner and now
My,
she's at protests.
my DMs on Instagram have been inundated with recommendations for gas masks and other, protest safety equipment. Yeah, I mean,
Umbrellas.
yeah, yeah, yeah. From people that have never attended a protest in their entire lives. I mean, yes, it is. There is a very emotional and visceral response that so many Americans are having to what they're seeing play out on American streets, whether it's ICE or the National Guard. But my fear of the National Guard is not the way that it's being deployed now. I mean, this is, it's dangerous, and I don't want to downplay the significance of it, the fact that people should be outraged. But what we saw in Washington, D.C. was purely performative. It was
Mhm.
all theatrical. You had half the National Guard that were deployed there doing gardening. I mean, literally mowing grass, picking up trash, and out there with, with weed whackers. And then the other half were armed tourists walking around the National Mall and other federal property. They didn't deploy them on law enforcement missions, thank God, because that would be a violation of posse comitatus, because they
Mhm.
don't have law enforcement training, and they are not permitted under the law to engage in the law enforcement role, short of uh, declaring martial law, which unfortunately, NBC reported this week that there have been some very serious discussions inside of the White House about declaring martial law. And that's what goes back to me thinking that, this antagonistic behavior that we're seeing displayed by ICE and these immigration agents is designed to invoke a violent response so that this administration can justify declaring martial law and using the military to conduct law enforcement operations, which would
Yeah.
be absolutely, I mean, that would be the end. There's
It's
no
it's
more.
never the end, Michael. I believe that we will continue.
That's the end of the. There's no. You can't even say that we are in a democracy. I don't give a shit what John Fetterman says about the fact that we had last election cycle. You declare martial law based on the justification of what we've witnessed transpire in American cities over the past several weeks, which is completely um, provoked by the government. I mean, we're watching state-sponsored violence play out, and that would be, I mean, constitutional crisis much. I just think it would be the end of democracy in America.
But what I'm just proud of the American people though, because as someone just said in the chat, affirming that it is not over because we are being attacked violently. And for the most part, people are responding by like throwing a Subway sandwich. Like that is as aggressive as things have been. It seems like then they talk about, oh, you need to turn the temperature down. Well, this is one of those situations where it's like they're screaming, be calm. And we're all like, but we are calm. We're just dancing and protesting and holding signs. You guys are the ones who are not calm. And they look absolutely ridiculous. I want to pull up the photo of the guy. He's pointing a gun at a woman who is filming. There, this one here.
Yeah.
Like this is the epitome of not calm. Like this is not turning down any temperatures. He looks ridiculous. What are your thoughts on this? Because I every time I just this to me is laughable. I mean, it's obviously scary as shit, but it's laughable.
Yeah, no. So it just to be clear, it is it's a less than lethal um, weapon. It's a pepper ball gun.
I
But
don't want to take a pepper ball shot to the face.
no, and then I mean the other thing is like he's pointing it at someone who's in a vehicle. As somebody who's been pepper sprayed while I was driving a car before. That doesn't, that's not. It's just that everything about this is ridiculous. It's dangerous. It's ridiculous. It goes against every departmental policy or procedure that I was ever, um, taught. And I mean, quite frankly, again, this is just like another example of I think back to my own career. Had that picture been of me 10 years ago doing exactly that, I would have been fired immediately.
Thank you. And also, just I want to say, isn't he embarrassed? Like, I would feel like this is the kind of photo that your like colleagues would roast you for. Like, this is like he looks ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, I venture probably some of his colleagues are roasting him for this.
Good.
But I mean, nevertheless, like it's like I was talking to a friend of mine who's works for DHS, and this particular agent I have a great deal of respect for. Works in child exploitation, does child exploitation cases, like really, really gruesome cases involving child prostitution. Doing the Lord's work, so to speak. That being said, like was a little bit irritated with me for all of my the anti-ICE conversation that they felt like I was engaging in publicly. And I said, listen, like I look at these examples of these ICE agents and the way that they're behaving, and I can't find any parallels to anything in my career, even like the worst of the worst cops that I worked alongside of, weren't this brazen and weren't this. I mean, it's intentional.
Mhm.
Um, it's. I mean, there's incidents where I say like, okay, like this guy clearly got pissed off. Like I think in this particular situation with the picture that was just up, there were these individuals were following these agents around the city, which I can understand how that would like piss them off. But you also have to recognize that as an agency, just like it's your responsibility as a police officer to recognize the history of policing in America, like you need
Mhm.
to understand how unpopular this policy that you're enforcing is in this country. Like
Thank you.
people do not agree. And I've even in like my most diehard like anti-immigration, I wouldn't call them friends, but people that I speak to on a regular basis are like, this is insane. Like we were told, I mean, again, it's, we've heard it now 1,000 times, but we were told they were going to go after the worst of the worst. Um, and I mean, that's what my colleague, my former colleague, when I was talking to her, she's like, we were told we're going to go after the worst of the worst. And now we're being told we need to do 75 bodies a week.
Well,
Um,
and Turning it into a quota system is part of the reason why there is so much excessive force, I think, because people are getting frustrated and they're not hitting the numbers. Like it's almost like
Right.
it's like a bad sales thing. It's like you're walking, is it Glenn Ross, where he's like, put that coffee down. Coffee's for people who deport 500 people a day or some shit. Like it is insane to me that they would even put that kind of pressure and that kind of number on it to satisfy this base of people who, when they say, because I see people online, oh, yeah, this is what I voted for, this kind of cruelty, they're often not even in the places. Like, we're
Well,
talking like nobody in Chicago's asking for this. Nobody in New York's asking for this. That's why it's a sanctuary city. And
well, that
so go ahead.
yes, that's what is broken with the American police model. And not even just set aside, ICE and the way that they're going about dealing with the deportations and setting up a quota system. But my entire career um, was quantified. Success in law enforcement is quantified by the number of arrests that you make, period. Because that's the only tangible, um, you know, tangible thing that they can come up with to show that something is actually being done. And listen, in the beginning of my career, it was ridiculous. Like when I was in the first investigative unit I went to was the first district's vice office. And it was like, typical vice office. We did prostitution, we did, gambling, we did narcotics, and violent crimes. But the kind of unwritten rule, or I mean, not even unwritten or unspoken. I mean, shit, they used to write it on the fucking chalkboard. Was like five arrests, and you go home. And so, of course, like guys would go out and lock up the first 5 people that they came across for whatever bullshit. And it's not to say they weren't making like bad arrests; they were just
Mhm.
making bullshit arrests, meaningless fucking arrests that have absolutely no effect or affect on, you know, crime or public safety. I mean, really public safety. And so that therein lies the problem. And then, of course, I'd say like early 2000s, mid 2000s, they were, quotas became like a 4-letter word. Like we can't, no quotas. There's no quotas. But then, and I mean, that came from the top down. But then you would have our officials, like our supervisors, go to these meetings with their supervisors, who would then in turn go to meetings with the city council and ultimately answer to the residents of the city. And the residents who oppose quotas now want to know what the fuck their police officers are doing. And the only way that they know how to, I mean, they would say, like, how many arrests did you make? How many arrests did you make? Well, I thought we weren't, and it's just this vicious cycle of nobody taking the time to really come up with, or at least listen to people that have, what is a meaningful way to quantify success? Like, what are we gonna deem as success in law enforcement? Because you can't arrest your way out of, out of crime, even if that's law enforcement's role. That doesn't, making tons and tons and tons of arrests does not, it doesn't even have an impact
Mhm.
on the problem.
I'm so glad that you said that because I feel like it's one of the first times I've ever heard anyone who was former law enforcement even go there as far as what really is truly serving and protecting our communities and reducing people in the community to numbers, which is basically what a quota system is not obviously solving the problem. And so now seeing it in mass, and it's causing them to arrest people in places where they certainly shouldn't be, which is like the drop off line or the pickup line at the local elementary school. And they end up tear gassing people in the streets in places where they shouldn't. And so this is just further fracturing the trust. And so I don't know what the solution is, Michael, but I know that we have leaders right now who are standing up and speaking out.
Starting to, yeah. I
Yeah,
mean, they're starting. I hear from politicians every once in a while that are like, "Would you please stop telling people to call my office and scream at me?" I'm like,
everybody, listen
yeah,
to Michael. Call the offices, scream at
yes,
them.
call the offices and scream at them and let them know that this is intolerable and this is un-American and it's unlawful. Denying a person their denying a person due process is there we go. There's the numbers. Call your member of Congress. I was just thinking. Sorry, I was thinking of when somebody asked Donald Trump if he was going to suspend habeas corpus.
Oh my God, he clearly had no idea.
Suspend who? Suspend who? Oh, you're good. That's a better question for Kristi Noem. Like, what?
Like,
Kristi Noem can't suspend habeas corpus, you fucking moron.
Well, she also didn't know what it was when she was asked about it during her confirmation hearing. So, like, everything is it is idiocracy. Everything is being run by a bunch of incompetent morons, and I think the people see that, which is actually a good thing. And so, I want to leave us because we're out of time, but I want to leave us with the. I love what Pritzker's doing, and he's calling things out in a way that I think other governors should. So if you have a governor, folks, if you have a governor, call your governor and say, hey, what Pritzker's doing, speak out like this. So let's run that.
I forget his name. I'm horrible with names, but I think even better than Pritzker is the mayor of Chicago.
Oh, Brandon Johnson. He is crushing it.
He is absolutely crushing. I cannot tell you. I tune into every one of his press conferences and am like, every politician in America that cares about democracy and freedom needs to take a page from this guy's playbook.
Well, yeah, you can tell because he speaks from the heart. And it really resonates, and there's no malice or anger to what he says. You can tell there's no ego there. It's not like he needs to strike back. He's like, I'm saying what I'm saying. And my main concern is protecting the citizens of my city. And it's very soothing, I have to say. I agree with you, Michael. I think a new star, perhaps a political star, is emerging in Chicago, which is another reason why Donald Trump hates Chicago so much, because it keeps breeding people who are absolutely going to be a part of taking him down. So we don't have a clip of Brandon, I don't think. I love that I'm talking about him like he's my friend. We don't have a clip of him, but we do have a clip of Pritzker. So we'll run that on the way out, and I'll see you next week, and hopefully things will be calm. No martial law. No martial law.
I got my money's on martial law.
No martial law. I need everybody chanting it. I need everybody like meditating it. Get your crystals out. Pray. No martial law.
Although, we may end up with the big Epstein file reveal, and then I think Trump's going to be very distracted from declaring martial law or any of these other
80 million other distractions and shenanigans. Yeah, I was like declaring war on, I don't know, Venezuela, Colombia, somebody blowing up ships. I don't know. It's like, it's too much. There's too much. Yeah. And I just don't want martial law to be added into the mix, y'all. So I'm just going to need everybody to not put that out there, even though it's definitely out there. And like you said, Michael, possibly coming. But I'm just not going to allow my brain to wrap itself around that yet, y'all. So we'll see you next week and still have civil rights.
That's right.
See ya.
Get me. Come and get me. And what kind of a country are we living in where the president of the United States is targeting his political opponents? I mean, that is the world that we're living in now, where he is calling out. He said he was going to jail Gavin Newsom. He says he's going to jail me. He says he's going to jail the mayor of the city of Chicago. These are people who stand against him, disagree with him, speak out about it. but literally have done nothing wrong. We are doing the people's business by standing up for them.